South said the slaves were property. It was that property I was confiscating. This had no effect on the border states who held slaves. Their day would come, but it was not to be today. This was a military and strategic decision. Primary objective was to be, if thousands of Southern slaves donned Union uniforms, took up arms, they would shock them into laying down their arms and ending this terrible rebellion. Make no mistake, emancipation shortened this war. 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg was fought and won by Union General Meade. But again, thousands of young boys fell on both sides. In the fall of that year, I was invited to Gettysburg to give a speech as part of dedication to a cemetery for those fallen soldiers. All this death, what could I say? What would I say?
Now, in the midst of a tragic war not yet won, a lot of folks gather in Gettysburg for a dedication, and among them is the President. Speaker, he has a few words to say. Now, in the midst of a tragic war not yet won, a lot of folks gather in Gettysburg for a dedication, and among them is the President. He looks older now, seldom smiles. War has been so long, so many dead on both sides. After a while, after the main speaker, he has a few words to say.
Fourscore, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived, so dedicated, can long endure. We're met on the great battlefield of that war. Come here to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place to those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. Those brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, rather, to live it, to be here dedicated to the unfinished work that those who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us, rather, to be here dedicated to the great task that lies before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion for that cause to which they gave their last full measure of devotion. And we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Not only did I have to deal with the rising casualty counts, but now I had to deal with a situation where, out of fear, many young men were fleeing from the battle lines. now faced a firing squad. I was always trying to find ways to pardon them. Sometimes it was all too easy. There's Secretary Stanton. As to the 14-year-old waiting to be shot, let us spank this 14-year-old drummer boy and send him home to his mother. Sincerely, A. Lincoln. In the closing months of the war, General Sherman finished his horrific yet successful march to the sea. General Grant took Vicksburg, giving the Union full control of the Mississippi, and then went on to defeat the Confederate forces at Chattanooga. And finally, Richmond fell, which forced General Lee to surrender his troops to General Grant in Appomattox. General Lee said he surrendered more to Abe Lincoln's goodness than to General Grant's artillery. This from a man who said a day never passed where he didn't pray for the people of the North. Well, now it was time for healing. It was also time for my second inaugural address. As tens of thousands stood in a mud-soaked Pennsylvania Avenue, I spoke of the war in a tone of reconciliation. Both parties deprecated war. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude of duration is already achieved. One party would make war rather than let the nation survive. The other party would accept war rather than let it perish. Both parties read the same Bible and pray to the same God and invoke His aid against the other. He could not answer both prayers. With malice toward none, charity for all. Let us strive on to finish the work that we're in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, and to do all to attain and achieve a just and lasting peace amongst ourselves and with all nations. When I had finished the speech, I turned to the band and asked them to play one of my favorite songs, Dixie. Apparently they don't know it very well. Now it's time for healing. My orders were that the surrendered Confederate soldiers would be allowed to return home with their horses and mules in time for spring planting, so that this season, for the first time in 4 years, they could plant seed instead of men in southern soil. For my part, I was anxious to visit the fallen capital of Richmond. I took my son Tad with me, and as we walked about a mile down the main avenue, there were those former slaves, some of them who tried to kneel before me. No, get up, you must not kneel before me. Kneel only to God and thank Him for the freedom you shall enjoy hereafter. You see, now they were truly free. Not by the emancipation which could have been declared null and void now that the war was over, but by the 13th Amendment, which, when ratified, would abolish slavery in the entire nation forever. I also wanted to visit the so-called Confederate White House, and on a whim I sat in old Jeff Davis's chair. Even he was no enemy now. Well, that was 6 days ago, and there's still celebrating in the streets of Washington. I promised my wife Mary I would take her to the theater this evening, get away from all this business for a while. It's been some time since we visited the theater. 2 years ago, we went to the Ford's Theater, which is where we're going tonight. Back then we saw a play called The Marble Heart, with a young actor called Booth, John Wilkes Booth, a marvelous actor. After the play, I sent a note backstage to see if I could meet with him. He declined. And no surprise, over these war years, many people have come to hate me. But I hope that'll all change now. I expect it will, now that we can all enjoy this newfound peace and bright future ahead of the entire nation. Well, I suppose I ought to be running off. Mary Todd is many things, but she's not a patient woman. The fact is, she's the only thing I'm afraid of that I know can't hurt me. But you know, you've patiently listened to my story about the Civil War. It's only fair that I give you a moment to ask any questions you might have about Abe Lincoln and the Civil War, and then we'll talk about the play. Anyone out there have any questions? Anyone? You all did your history lesson. Yes?
How many boys did you have?
4. We lost Edward before we went to the White House. Lost Willie during my term as president, which put Mary in another deep depression, as well as myself. But she was inconsolable for much of the time. Anyone else? Is there one in the back? Yes.
Wasn't Robert Lincoln part of Grant's? Was he an administrator too?
Well, he was Secretary to Britain under Grant, but he was also Secretary of War for another administration following that. Anyone else? Just holler out because I can't see with this light. On this side, any questions? Well, we're going to have another guest come out here shortly, but you might have some questions about Abe Lincoln sometime. It's a little controversial. Yes? I'm just scratching him in here. Well, I guess I will run off. It's been a rather strange week here at the White House. I've been having a recurring nightmare. Same dream every night for the past week. I wake up and start wandering around and I hear all this crying. So I go to investigate. As I go down the stairs, there's a coffin lying there in the lobby. I ask one of the guards, who died in the White House? And the answer is always the same: President. Another odd thing that happened this evening, my White House bodyguard and I have sort of a ritual. At the end of every day, I approach him and we salute each other and I say, "Good night, Mr. Crook." Well, tonight, after the salute, I blurted out, "Goodbye, Mr. Crook." Isn't that odd? Well, perhaps it is goodbye. Say, I have a better idea. There's not a large group here tonight. Why don't we all load up in the carriages and we'll all go to the theater? You never know what could happen at the theater. Let's all ride along to Ford's Theater. Mark Twain. Bridges, schools, highways, national forests, even postage stamps from all over the world dedicated to Mark Twain, including one released in this country just last month. But who was this cigar-smoking author we call Mark Twain? Well, he gave us the adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and that little story about the jumping frog, the little frog that made Mark Twain a household term all over the world. But Twain had a darker side. His unhappiness with the inhumanity of humanity led him to rail against hypocrisy wherever he found it. And in later life, he suffered personal loss, like bankruptcy and the loss of beloved family members. But through it all, Twain used humor to make us think. And using humor, he took generations on an adventure through life. But controversy surrounds our Mr. Twain. There seems, in fact, to be two Mark Twains. Interesting, as Twain means two. So many contradictions make up his personality. He mercilessly criticized religion, and his best friend was the local pastor, the Reverend Joseph Twitchell. He despised wealth, although he sold his name and image at every turn to achieve it. He feared being bucked off a wild horse out west, but days later, when accosted by armed robbers, he merely pushed a pistol from his face and gave the gunman a lecture on gun safety. Who can explain these and other contradictions that make up this very complex man we call Mark Twain? Why, only one man. Ladies and gentlemen, Samuel Clemens. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't it a solemn, beautiful thought that in any society, first pioneers never the military, never the newspaper, never the missionary, but whiskey? My name is Samuel Langhorne Clemens. I have to get that out of the way, otherwise folks try to order chicken from me. Now the Civil War produced many heroes, but I was not one of them. I only learned one thing in all my time in military service, and that was that any time I heard the sound of battle, I would perform a specific maneuver. It was called the retreat. I was pretty good at it. Fact is, I knew more about retreating than the fellow who invented retreating. And now we've heard from a great many people who did something during the war. I think it's only fair we listen for a moment to somebody who started to do something and then didn't. There were thousands who stepped into the war for a moment and then stepped out again forever. And by their sheer numbers, it's only right we give them a voice. Not a loud one, but a modest one. Not a boastful one, but an apologetic one. And by that way we can learn why they didn't do anything, or what process they used not to do it. Now, you probably didn't notice this, but I was in the back watching Mr. Lincoln, and I was impressed by his use of maps while he explained the war. One map after another, and I was watching and I thought, you know, God must have invented war in order for Americans to learn geography. That was the part of geography I was concerned with, more specifically the stretch of the Mississippi that ran from New Orleans up to Hannibal. See, just before the war, I had achieved a boyhood dream. Ever since I was a young boy, all I ever wanted to be was a riverboat pilot. And this was my ears. Ran up with a man named Captain Horace Bixby, who agreed for a sum of money to learn me the river. That's exactly what he did. When I was 24 years old, I received my riverboat pilot's license. I thought that was it. I'd achieved my dream. I'd always be on the river. You see, I was pretty much at home in Dixie. But the Civil War broke out, stopped all that. The fact is, when the war broke out, every waterway in this country was transformed into just another battlefield. I realized that the Union and the Confederacy was searching for riverboat pilots. I did not want to be pressed into service as a pilot, for you see, we're perched on top of that boat in a glass house. It's a pretty easy target for anybody on the shore, regardless of their marksmanship. So I headed back to Hamburg, but didn't know which way I was going to lean, first one way and then the other. Got back to Hamburg, two of my boyhood friends talked me into more or less going on an adventure to fight for the Confederacy. That's right, I served the Confederacy proudly for about 2 weeks. Never saw much action. Mostly just hid out in empty barns, and sometimes a kind-hearted farmer's wife would make us breakfast. We stood guard duty all the time until we got sleepy. Never saw any action, but we heard rumors of it. Once there was a rumor that there was a column of Union horsemen on the way up the road. We all were scared to death. We ran to the barn and peeked out the cracks in the boards. It was pretty dark out that night. And I looked down and I saw what could have been a rider, and maybe more behind him. I wasn't for sure. I took my musket, pointed it out to the windows, shaking, and all of a sudden I heard someone yell, "Fire!" I thought I heard 100 muskets fire, but when the shooting stopped, we all went out to see what we had done. There he was. He had fallen from his horse, arms spread out, gasping for air, the front of his shirt stained with blood. And as I got closer, I had a cold thought run through me that I had just committed murder. I had never met this man. He had never done me any harm. He wasn't even wearing a uniform, wasn't even armed, just a stranger passing through. That's all we ever found out about him. And as I got closer, I heard him mutter about his wife and children, and I got even colder, and I thought, here, this thing I had done had gone past him and now fell on them. They had done me no harm, just that he had done me no harm. I thought, this must be the epitome of war. The killing of a stranger who in other times you might have helped or might have helped you. I wasn't cut out for this. Then it got worse. We got word that the armies of U.S. Grant were fast approaching. Then I started having nightmares every night about this war. They all ended the same way. So I performed my maneuver. I thought the most noble course for me to pursue would be to withdraw from the Confederacy and allow the North a chance to win. So I resigned, and the South fell. Years later, President U.S. Grant thanked me for my war effort. How many believe that's true? I'm losing ground. Actually, not only did I meet President Grant, we became quite close in his last years. There's the President, my daughter Susie, and myself as he dictated his memoirs of the war. When he left office after 2 disastrous terms as president, his family fortune was gone, reputation in shambles. But through my help as publisher, we decided to publish those memoirs, which he finished only 2 days after he died. The sale of those memoirs restored his family's fortune and repaired somewhat his reputation. Oh, he's a great general, General Grant, but not such a great president as history will bear out. And he was not such a great president, in my opinion, because he wasn't good at politics. got Abe Lincoln, he helped Abe Lincoln get elected. And because of that, he got one of those government jobs. He was appointed secretary to the governor of the new territory of Nevada. Since Nevada seemed to be a safe distance away from the war, I offered to pay both our way, and my brother would take me with him. We left out of St. Joseph, Missouri, on the overland stage. 3 weeks later, we pulled into Virginia City. What a wild and woolly place that was. There were whiskey mills every 30 paces, jails on every other street corner, hurdy-gurdy houses, wide open gambling, street fights, robberies, murders. Some talk of building a church. There was no place for a Presbyterian. And I didn't remain one long. Almost got killed in a duel. That's one thing I have in common with Mr. Lincoln. In his youth, he almost got killed in a duel as well. His case happened when his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, and one of her friends wrote an anonymous newspaper article accusing a politician of a wrongdoing. A politician they accused was Abe Lincoln's brother-in-law, Mr. Shields, who was an Irish politician. An Irish politician with a short fuse. Imagine that. And not only any old politician, he was the treasurer of the state of Illinois. And if you can imagine it, they accused this treasurer of the state of Illinois of embezzling money. Well, this politician was incensed. He wanted to get to the bottom of it. He told the newspaper editor, he told him who wrote that article, and he was going to challenge him to a duel. Well, the editor went to Abe Lincoln. Abe Lincoln stepped forward and said, I wrote the article to protect his wife. Well, the politician challenged Abe, and they went out to the middle of the river, a little island out there. When I got out there, he said, all right, Abe, choose your weapon. Well, Abe looked at the politician, and they said, well, how about potatoes, shillelaghs, or cow dung at 5 paces? Well, this unexpected humor won the politician over, and all was forgiven. They actually rigged up a little sort of a farce because people on the mainland were expecting somebody to come back wounded or dead. So they agreed to get a log and put a coat around it and float it back to the land in a canoe. But when that was discovered, they were in even worse trouble. I was involved in a duel, very closely involved, because I insulted a rival newspaper's editor. One thing led to another, or somebody mentioned a duel. Now, duels were commonplace in Virginia City. Why, if you hadn't killed or crippled somebody in a duel or been killed or crippled yourself, you had no stature in the community. I was against duels in general. I felt they were dangerous. Well, nowadays, somebody challenged me to a duel, I apologize to them. Take them by the hand, lead them to a quiet place, and kill them. Then we got word that the territory just passed a new law. Anybody involved in a duel would go to prison. I did not want to go to prison. But the final straw came when we found out my opponent was a crack shot, an expert marksman. All these things started to add up to a trip to San Francisco, which I embarked on shortly thereafter. Got to San Francisco, went to work for another newspaper. The trouble soon returned. For upon my arrival, I noticed a situation amongst a group of people being persecuted simply because of the color of their skin. Not the African slaves everybody was fighting over, the ones I grew up with, but these were the hard-working Chinese immigrants who were being set upon not only by the general population, but also by a portion of the San Francisco Police Department. So I started writing articles, harsh articles, exposing and condemning their bad behavior because it reminded me of how the slaves were mistreated when I was just a boy. Oh yes, I had come a long way on my feelings about slavery. When I was just a young boy growing up in that little village of Hannibal, I had no aversion to slavery. Didn't know anything was wrong with it. Nobody in the community spoke against it. The newspaper never printed anything negative about slavery, and from our church pulpit, our local pastor said, God approved it, it was a holy thing. And then he'd open up the Bible and read a scripture that was designed to settle their minds on the matter. Don't have to look too far in the good book to see that it condemns anything like that. But those scriptures were never quoted. Wonder how they could lie so. result of practice, no doubt. I had discovered I had grown up in a community of liars. Oh, not the lies we might exchange about the size of that fish we almost caught, or the lies we all tell that person who shows up on our doorstep unexpectedly, when we tell them how glad we are to see them, when we wish they were with the cannibals and it was dinner time. Now, this is a different kind of a lie. This was an insidious lie, a shadowy lie. A lie that occurs when an entire community witnesses an atrocity and yet remains silent. And from that silence they commit the lie of silent assertion. And as a grown man, I had a burning desire to tell the real story of my boyhood days. Oh, but you see, you didn't tell us that story, Mr. Twain. You gave us the adventures of Tom Sawyer. Well, true enough, that book was based on my boyhood, but it wasn't the whole story. And that book only mentioned slavery at one time. Wasn't enough. I started my next project, Huckleberry Finn. Now, here'd be a way for me to tell the whole story. But my first attempts at Huckleberry turned out to be just a sequel to Tom Sawyer. Just more harmless adventures. I had to put this book on a shelf for 5 years. Make another trip down the Mississippi after being away for 20. To see with my own eyes the condition of the so-called free slaves. Many were in worse condition than they were before. In the end, Huckleberry Finn is a very different book than Tom Sawyer. I'd like to illustrate that point by bringing you just a portion of Huckleberry. Now, Huckleberry Finn is a story about a boy. Some of you have been boys. And the rest of you have had a great deal to do with boys. But Huckleberry Finn is a story about a boy who lived a great many years ago in the Mississippi River Valley. He was ignorant, unwashed, and insufficiently fed, and he had a deformed conscience. His right and wrong got flipped around because of how he was brought up. But he had as good a heart as any boy ever had. And he was the only really independent person, boy or man, who lived in the community. And for that reason, I suppose, he was continually happy. Now, in this book, Huckleberry tells his own story, all by himself. You don't know about me without you read a book called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. That ain't no matter. Now, that book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, who told the truth. Man. There's some things he stressed, but man, he told the truth. Right, that ain't nothing. I never knew anybody that didn't lie once without being Aunt Polly or the widow Numbers. Now, the widow, she took me in as her son-in-law. She was going to civilize me. She used to cry over me and call me poor lost lamb. Called me a lot of other names, too. But she didn't mean no harm. Then she dressed up in some of the new clothes. All I could do is sweat, feel all cramped up. Pretty soon I'm on the smoke, but the widow, she wouldn't let me. She kept saying how it was a mean habit and not clean, and how I ought to try not to do it anymore. Ain't that the way with some folks? They get down on a thing when they don't know nothing about it. She took snuff, too. That was all right because she'd done it herself. Now, her sister, Miss Watson, was a tall, slim old maid with goggles on all the time, saying, "Don't put your feet up there like the Huckleberry. Don't scrunch up like that. Sit up straight. Can't you try to behave?" And she told me all about the bad place. I said, "I wish I was there." She got mad then, but I didn't mean nothing by it. All I wanted was change. All I wanted was to go someplace. I wasn't particular. She kept saying how she's going to live her life, so let's go to the good place. Well, I couldn't see no advantage of going where she was going. So I decided I wasn't going to try for it. Well, I've been going to school about 4 or 5 months. I learned how to read and write and say the multiplication tables up 6 times 7 is 35. I didn't think I'd ever get any further than that if I was to live forever. Then one night I lit my candle and I was going up to my room, and there sat Captain his own self. Oh, he tore me something off about putting on airs and getting dressed up and going to school. Pretty soon he'd catch me. He took me over to a little cabin over on the Illinois shore. I didn't think I'd ever get a chance to run off. Oh, Pap, he's mighty handy with his hickory. I could hardly stand it. I was all over welts. Then one night he gets drunk over in town, come back talking about how there's going to be another trial to get me away from him him and give me over to the widow for my guardian. He got to cuss and said, I'd like to see the widow try to get you. Whenever him Nicky began to work, he'd almost always go for the government. This time he says, why, you call this a government? Why, you just look at it and you see this lie. There stands a law getting ready to go for a man's son. His own son, which he's had all the trouble and the anxiety and the expense of raising up. And just he got that son all raised up, ready to go to work, do something for him, and give him a rest. There stands a law getting ready to go for him. Now you call that a government. Why, man can't get his rights on talking like that. Why, look at him. There's a free nigger over there from Ohio. Mulatto. Most white's a white man. He had on the whitest shirt you ever see. Shiny his hat. Gold watch and a chain. What do you think? Why, they said he's a professor from some college and talk all kind of language. He knows everything. But that ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was at home. Well, that let me out. Why, election day, and I'll get ready to go vote myself. I wasn't too drunk to get there. They told me there's a state in this country that that nigger vote I draw out. I said, I'll never vote again in my life. That's the words I used. They all heard me. This country can rock for all of me. Why, I'll never vote again. Old Pamp, he was so excited, he didn't realize that his older leg was taking him. He went tumbling head over heels over a barrel of salt pork, banged up both shins. That's the hardest kind of language. Then all of a sudden he did out his left foot, he gave that tub of rattling cake, but it weren't good judgment. Down the boot had a couple of his toes taken out the front. He cussed a bunch more, but then he passed out, and I saw my chance. I ran back out there in the woods, I got that canoe I've been hiding. I laid down that canoe and I just went right down the river. I got away. Spent some time on Jackson's Island. That's where I met Miss Watson's runaway slave, Jim. He said he'd run off too. Well, I promised I wouldn't tell on him. Oh, I know what I done wrong. I know you're supposed to tell where the runaway slave is. I know folks would despise me and call me low down there, but I didn't care. I wasn't going back there again. Well, me and Jim, we found a piece of raft on the river. We started heading down the water on that raft. We traveled nights and hideout days. We just let that current take that raft wherever it wanted to. It's lovely to live on a raft. We'd lie on the backs and smoke our pipes. Look up at the sky at night time. Not a cloud in it. Sky is ever so deep when you lie on your back in the moonshine. I never noticed before. Or how far a body can hear across the water. Well, pretty soon I'd fall asleep, and Jim, he wouldn't even wake me up when it was my time to watch me. Then I'd finally wake up, and there he'd be sitting in the corner with his head betwixt his knees, just crying. I never let on, but I know what it's about. He's thinking about his wife and children way up yonder. See, Jim, he'd never been away from home before in his life. He's feeling low and homesick. I reckon he cared about his folks about as much as white folks care about theirs. Don't seem natural, but I reckon it's so. Well, me and Jimmy kept talking about K-Road down the foot of Illinois where the Ohio River comes in. We said we got down there, we was going to sell that raft and get on a steamboat and go up north by the free states and thus be out of trouble. Jim, he said he felt almost feverish and trembling being so close to freedom. He said when he got up there, he's going to go to work and never spend a cent. And when he got enough, he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm near Miss Watson. And then they both go to work and buy the children. And if their master wouldn't sell them, why, he'd get an abolitionist to go steal them. Ooh, that most froze me to hear such talk. Why, Jimmy never talked like that in his life before, coming out flat foot and saying how he was going to steal his children. Children which was owned by a man I didn't even know. Why, man never done me no harm. It was coming into my head, he wasn't no free, and who's to blame? Me. I was helping him. My conscience started to get after me all day long, arguing back and forth. Conscience said, tell where the slave is. No, tell where the slave is. No, I can't tell where. All right, leave me alone, conscience. Tomorrow morning, first light, I'll paddle ashore now. I'll tell where Jim is. Well, pretty soon it gets light. Jim, he thinks he sees K-Roll. I said, no, Jim, you better let me paddle ashore and see first. It might not be, you know. So he gets a canoe ready for me. Puts his coat down in the bottom for me to sit on, gives me the paddle, and I shove off. And when I'm about 50 yards out, I hear him holler out, There you go. The old true hook. And all that white Jim never kept his promise to old Jim. I just felt sick when I heard that. There I was, paddling off all in a sweat to tell on him when he said that, just throw all the tuck right out of me. I didn't know whether I was glad I started out or whether I weren't.